Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Best Kept Plans. Today's video is going to be a reading wrap up for February 2023. If you're interested in seeing what books I read last month, please stick around. As I said in my introduction, this is going to be my reading recap for February 2023. I am not gonna lie, this is the third time I am filming this video. I have been struggling with lighting and trying to film in different locations so that I get better lighting. And then I had an issue where I thought I was recording and I wasn't. And so this is the third time I am attempting to film this video. I'm hoping it's the last time I'm attempting to film this video, but I am really excited to talk with you all about the books that I read in February. I think I stumbled on a couple of really great books that I'm excited to talk about. Definitely had some that really were not as enjoyable for me, but very excited to chat with you all. I will be referencing my Archer and Olive Amy Tangerine collab notebook. This is what I use to keep track of all of the books that I read every month. There's a bunch of different spreads in here, some intro spreads, and then I do have spreads for like every book that I read. I did do a flip through, and if I remember, I will link it up in the cards, but I did do a flip through of what kind of like the intro pages for my 2023 reading journal look like. But this is what I'm going to be referencing throughout this video to chat with you all about like ratings for the books that I read. So let's get right into it. The first book that I read in February was one of my most anticipated releases for the year, and that is Final Offer by Lauren Asher. This is the third book in the Dreamland Billionaire series. I read the first two books in the series in 2022 and absolutely love them. I gave both of them 5 out of 5 stars, and so I was really looking forward to this book. I will say I was definitely a little more worried about this one and hesitant about this one because each book is based off of a different brother in this one family, and the brother that this book is focused on was definitely probably my least favorite of the 3 brothers, just from what you know about them from the other 2 books. I will say that I did really enjoy this book, but I did not like it as much as what is it? The Fine Print or Terms and Conditions. There was things that I liked about this. There was like second chance romance, which I think sometimes I really do enjoy. I love that the main character was Latinx. That's something that I really enjoyed. I think that there were higher stakes in this book because of the female main character having a child. I did appreciate that the author did go there when it comes to talking about addiction and anxiety, feelings of low self-worth or familial trauma, generational trauma, and how that can manifest itself. That was definitely it was heavy subject matter, but it needed to be dealt with this character. I just think that for some reason, I didn't connect with this one as much as I did the other 2 in the series. So I rated this 3.5 stars. I'm definitely being a little bit more, I think I'm taking a little bit more time after I'm reading books this year to come up with a rating. I think a lot of times last year, I just kind of quickly went with my gut as soon as I finished the book. And I think that ended up resulting in me rating some things higher than I probably would have if I sat with them a little bit longer. So I'm trying to do that this year. So I feel like my ratings are definitely a little bit more, I'm being more selective with 4.5, 5-star reads. So I enjoyed this, but 3.5 stars. The next book that I read in February was actually my February 2023 Instagram challenge book, and that is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. This was recommended by Alex at Artsy Plans. I feel like her and I have very similar reading tastes, and so I was very excited to give this book a read, and I will say I thoroughly enjoyed this. So this is a hockey book, but it's much more about this town as a whole, and the individuals that live within that town, societal structure within that town, class structure within that town, how that can lead to variations in treatment and opportunity for the younger generations that are living in this town. I thought it was incredibly interesting subject matter. This is the second book I've read by Fredrik Backman. I read Anxious People last year, and I really enjoyed Anxious People. I think I rated it 4 out of 5, but it definitely took me a little while to get into it, and I felt the same exact way about Beartown. I think that the issue for me is that while I enjoy books that have multiple perspectives in them, there's a lot of perspectives in Fredrik Backman's books. Like there's like at least 7, 8, 9 different people's perspectives that you get. And I think that at the beginning of a story, when you're just starting to be introduced into to characters, it doesn't let you like connect with one specific character. And so that can make it a little more challenging to get into. But once I got about a third of the way into this book, I was hooked, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was actually something that I read on Audible. I have been getting into audiobooks a little bit more this year. I do have a longer commute to work a couple days a week, and so reading something on Audible works out pretty well for that. So for February, I decided that I want to read one mystery thriller book every month for the entire year. I just happened to read one in January, and so it kind of worked out that I had already done that. So for February, I ended up picking Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. This is the first Alice Feeney book that I have read. I've heard a lot about Alice Feeney, specifically about Rock, Paper, Scissors and how awesome that book is. And so I decided to give Daisy Darker a try. I will say I didn't dislike this book. I just think that for me, I feel like mystery thrillers are either really, really good or just kind of middle of the road. And this was more of a middle of the road. I figured out one of the main plot twists with regards to the main character very early on in the book. It just seemed kind of obvious to me, honestly. And then even the like whodunit part, I kind of figured that out early on as well, like before halfway through. So while sometimes like figuring out like part of the twist or part of the story doesn't take away from the story, I think in this case it kind of did for me. It made the ending like a little boring and a little blah. And so while I didn't dislike this book, I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And to be totally honest, I wish I would have sat with it a little bit longer before I did that rating, because I think for me it's really more of a 3-star read. But I am still going to try more Alice Feeney in the future. It didn't put me off wanting to try more books from this author. The next book that I read in February was a new release. This was one that I was really excited about as well, and that is Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey. So I read It Happened One Summer and Hook, Line, and Sinker last year, and I really, really enjoyed both of those books. And so when I heard that Tessa Bailey had a new book coming out this year, I was very excited to get my hands on it. This seemed like something that would be perfect as a February read, as a around Valentine's Day kind of a read. And so I am glad that I picked it up right away and that I got to it right away. What I will say is that unfortunately, this one just did not catch me like other Tessa Bailey books have. I didn't dislike either of the two main characters. I actually enjoyed them. I just think that the storyline overall was a little out there for me. I do appreciate a romance that has some realistic energy to it, or like that seems like something that could actually happen in real life. I do think sometimes those romances that definitely are very like fictionalized and like almost border on like the fantasy of romance can be enjoyable, but I think this one it's like in the middle of that, and it didn't quite work for me. I have mostly already forgotten what happens in this book, and it's only been a couple weeks since I've read it. So I ended up giving it 2.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I got to in February was a book of poetry. Oh, the lighting. See, these are the issues that I'm having. Oh, hopefully it's not too terrible. Okay, so just like I want to read a mystery thriller book every month in 2023, I decided I wanted to read a book of poetry every month as well. I did read a book of poetry in January, so again, it just kind of worked out that I could make this a challenge for myself this year. And so for February, I ended up picking up what I believe is actually said Love by Atticus. I think when I did my February TBR, I said that this was called Lvoe, and to me that makes a little more sense, but it is, I think, called Love. I've never read any poetry by Atticus. I know that this poet is incredibly popular. I really enjoyed this book of poetry. There were so many lines in here that I was like, yes, this hits me. Like, I agree with this 100%. I agree with this completely. There were also definitely like some poems in here, some lines in here that I was like, don't agree with that at all. That's like totally not how my mind works. But it was just such an interesting book to get through. So many wonderful poems in here. I flew through this. I kind of want to read it again already, just because I feel like there was some really beautiful poems in here. And I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was one that I had been oddly avoiding for the last several months, and that is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I read a bunch of Taylor Jenkins Reid in 2022. I've enjoyed the vast majority of her books that I have read. This was a new release from her in fall 2022, and while I was excited to pick it up and get it, I, for some reason, just kept seeing it sitting on my shelf and was deciding not to read it and not to read it and not to read it. And I think the reason why is because Carrie Soto, this character, is mentioned in Malibu Rising, which is one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's other books. And I think that how we know of her in Malibu Rising just put a bad taste in my mouth. And so I was a little hesitant or cautious to read an entire book from her, being worried that I wouldn't like it, that I wouldn't like her as a character. But this was getting such, every time I would see people talking about this on Instagram or on YouTube, they said that it was absolutely incredible. So I definitely wanted to give it a try. And I will say I was pleasantly surprised at how much I love this book. I ended up falling in love with Carrie Soto as a character. I think she made some very questionable decisions here and there, but I understand her. I feel like I understand her drive and her desire to be the best and stay the best. But I also love the growth that she goes through in this book to realize what is actually important, what is actually important to her in her life. This just, it was so good. And I love tennis. Tennis is actually my favorite sport. I don't play it at all. I just like watching it. But it was so much fun to read about tennis and to read about the matches as she was going through them. I kept thinking about this book for days after I finished it. It made me look up videos on YouTube of my favorite tennis matches and things like that. So I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. I really, really loved this book. The next book I read in February 2023 was actually an ARC that I received on NetGalley. I requested this book because I loved the title and I loved the cover, and that is Once Upon a Tome, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller by Oliver Darkshire. I think that's the name. Yes, Oliver Darkshire. So I requested this, like I said, because I thought the title was really good. I thought the cover was very pretty. I had no idea when I requested it that it was nonfiction. And when I started reading it, I actually didn't automatically think it was nonfiction because it reads very much like a fiction story. But I was a few chapters in when I was like, wait a second, is this nonfiction? Is this a real place? Is this a real bookshop? And so I ended up looking online, and yes, this is a nonfiction book. The bookshop that this story revolves around is real. It does exist. And that made me instantly nervous because I am not a nonfiction reader, but I just couldn't help how much I was loving and enjoying reading this story. I think that what I've realized is that I enjoy a nonfiction that is not memoir style. If it's a short collection of essays or a collection of shorter stories, I think that I can get behind that a little bit more. And while this reads very much like fiction, I think it also kind of has that energy of almost being like a collection of little tiny short stories or short little snippets from the world of this bookstore. I loved this book. I thought it was so fun. It was so interesting. If you're someone who's not necessarily a huge fan of nonfiction, but you're interested in trying a nonfiction book out, I would highly recommend this because I think it's a great way to get into nonfiction without feeling like you're reading nonfiction. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. This was hands down my favorite book that I read in February. Oh, and I think it's coming out March 14th, 2023. So again, if you're interested, I highly recommend. I thought it was so good. The next book that I ended up reading was one that I got on Audible. Again, for my longer commutes to work, it's nice to have an Audible going. And this was one that I picked because of how long it was. I think on Audible it was like 16 hours, which is definitely longer. I've heard a lot about Mariana Zapata, but have never read any of her books. And so I ended up getting All Roads Lead Here. What I will say about this is that I'm really wondering if this is a book that my opinion of it or my enjoyment of it really hinged on the audiobook experience and the audiobook narrators. I'm wondering if I would have enjoyed this book more had I just physically read it versus listened to it. Because I unfortunately wasn't a huge fan of this, and I can't necessarily say why. Like I really did like the female main character. I liked that she was kind of like in her 30s, starting over, wanting a fresh new start for herself, realizing her self-worth, wanting this found family. I enjoyed that. I didn't dislike the male lead at all. He was very much grumpy, but I didn't dislike him. I do think it was a slow burn, and I'm totally okay with that because I think that that gives you the opportunity for a lot of really interesting character development and development of a platonic relationship between the two main characters. But I do feel like once it made that tip over into romance, into them getting together, it was way fast. And that was kind of like a little off-putting. I also think that I didn't love the male narrator in the audiobook, and I think that was off-putting to me as well. So I ended up giving this 2.5 stars. I don't know that I'm going to try another Mariana Zapata book out. If you've read a bunch of her books, if you think there's something that I might like more than All Roads Lead Here, definitely put a comment in the description box below. But as it stands right now, just from my experience of All Roads Lead Here, I probably am going to leave Mariana Zapata alone for a while. The next book that I ended up reading was another new release. This is, again, another one of the books that I would say was highly anticipated for me this year, and that is Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score. So I read Things We Never Got Over at the beginning of January 2023. It was actually the first book that I read this year, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I loved that book. I thought it was so good. I really enjoyed the two main characters. I loved the side characters. And so I was very excited that it was basically becoming a series. And I knew when I read the first one that it was becoming a series. And that's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to get into it. We meet the main character in this story in Things We Hide from the Light. It's Knox, the main character in that book's brother. We also meet the female love interest in that book as well. And I really liked both of those characters in Things We Never Got Over. So I was excited for Things We Hide from the Light. I do think that it put the main character Nash in a really interesting position. He went through something very traumatic in the first book, and you see him really reeling from that in this story, which I think was really interesting, and I really liked that. I did also like that he was very drawn to the female main character. I liked that they were creating this bond, that he felt he could trust her, that he felt he could talk with her. But I do think that there was a little bit too much back and forth once the two main characters got together. And I also do think that the kind of more mystery element to the story was a little bit monotonous. There is like a kidnapping subplot, and there was one in the first book as well. And while it doesn't not make sense, it definitely makes sense. It was just so similar to the first book that I was kind of a little, like, it was a little bit boring, I feel like. So I did enjoy this, but I didn't like it as much as Things We Never Got Over. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and part of me wishes I would have given it 3.5, but at the same time, I do feel like I enjoyed this more than Final Offer. And I do think a 3.5 rating for Final Offer is dead on. So maybe this is like a 3.75 4-star book. I don't know. And then the next book that I ended up reading in February was another audiobook. I read Love Light Farms in December 2022. I read that on Audible as well. I thought it was really cute. And so I ended up picking up the next book in the series, which is called In the Weeds. This book is similarly to Things We Hide from the Light and Things We Never Got Over. You meet these main characters in the Weeds in Love Light Farms. And now we get more information about their backstory, but also get to see their love story unfolding. I really enjoyed this. I liked these 2 characters in Love Light Farms. I thought they were fun. They were very awkward around each other. There was like a scandal in how they knew each other. And I did like that in the Weeds, we went back in time to see how they met and to see how their relationship started. I thought that was like a very valuable thing that the author ended up doing. I did enjoy the way that the story unfolded. I do think it got a little boring towards the end, but overall, I did enjoy this, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then the last book that I read in February is one that I've been actually really looking forward to. I really want to try to get into fantasy a little bit more this year, and I've heard so many things about A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas that I felt like it would be a great book to get into to try to get back into fantasy. I've heard nothing but great things about this series. One of my students at work actually recommended this to me. And so I picked it up and I really ended up enjoying it. So I think the first book in any series, especially a fantasy series, there's a lot of world building. And sometimes that can be a little boring. Sometimes that can be a little confusing or overwhelming. I really thought that it was done very well here. I was engaged the entire story, even though there was a lot of just this like background world building going on. I really liked the main character. I enjoyed and appreciated the male lead in this story. His friend I liked as well. And so I thought that the story unfolded in a really interesting way. The sacrifices made towards the end were really interesting. And I think that the villain in the story was a villain. Like, I did not like that woman. I wanted her dead, and I was so glad that she got what she deserved. And so I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it definitely made me want to continue on with the series. And I will say I actually finished this on, what day did I finish this? The 27th of February, maybe? And let's see. Yes, I finished this the 27th of February, and then I ended up starting the second book in the series, A Court of Mist and Fury, like right away once I finished it. So I think my March TBR is going to be posting soon, and you'll see that A Court of Mist and Fury is in that. But that is it for the books that I read in February 2023. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. If you've read any of these books, please put some spoiler-free thoughts down below. I love talking with people about books that we've mutually read and enjoyed. And as always, everyone, please be safe. Bye-bye.